All right, so welcome back to the show. We're here on the Energy Tech Show with Mandeep at ElecTrip. Mandeep started this company out of school, if I remember. I think I met you at like a TechStars
Yes.
like that in Austin, and was just blown away by your energy and the problem you were trying to solve. And it is cool because it involves Teslas, obviously. But please tell us a little bit about ElecTrip.
Yep. So ElecTrip is for the working professional that really needs to dial in their productivity. When we travel across Texas, which is something that happens all the time, the options that we currently have flying, taking a bus, driving yourself, you're losing at least an hour's worth of productivity. If you're billing $500 an hour, that's a lot of loss for the
Mhm.
company. On top of the liability aspect and the environmental impact of low occupancy vehicles driving around the state, we wanted a solution that came in, increase productivity, increase safety, and was carbon neutral if possible. And when we looked at Teslas, originally we didn't know how we could facilitate that solution. The capital expense of a Tesla is extremely high. But what's been proven over the last few years is electric is the go-to way for fleets.
Mm.
And once we figured out how to operationally solve for that, we created electric. Door-to-door rides, private, professionally driven in Teslas with Wi-Fi. So if
Mhm.
you want to be productive, you can do that better than with any other solution.
Yeah, and I think this comes up a lot. How do you is there range anxiety? Let's start there.
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
there's always so the irony is that we've sold so many Teslas through the referral program. I think we've generated Tesla
Oh,
more revenue
hmm,
than we've generated in our operation, which is hilarious to me because range anxiety is the number one concern for people adopting electric vehicles.
mhm,
And when they see that the cars can go from one city to another, that's the main issue solved.
mhm,
And then there's no more barriers to adoption. So I really think range anxiety is the number one barrier to adoption for these vehicles, especially now that there are 2012 Teslas still on the road.
hmm.
People aren't concerned about the longevity of the battery life itself. So yeah, absolutely. We absolutely solve for that through the experience, but yes, it's something that we
Yeah,
felt very intensely.
and I guess it's implied you can get to any city without having to stop and recharge like that. That is known
Well, so
in
the
most
older
cities.
right. So the older vehicles you couldn't do that.
Okay.
The newer ones you can.
Hmm.
And it's ironic because the charge rates have gotten so fast
Hmm.
that it's almost questionable whether or not you want to do the Houston Dallas trip 3.5 hours in the car without stopping, but most of the vehicles can now. So it's technology is really evolving fast.
Yeah, I guess the question is, do people still want to stop at Bucky's?
That's and the beauty is that now they have chargers. So
Yeah.
people love Bucky's. It's a great experience. So yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
yeah.
Those are one of the hidden gems of Texas.
It
Is you gotta have your Bucky's experience once.
Yeah, so I had a buddy just fly in. Well, he lives here now from London, and he sent me a meme this morning, and it was about the daily routine of a Texan, and it had Bucky's, Whataburger, and I forget the last brand, but yeah, they're iconic, right? They're Texas
Yeah.
staples. So
I don't know if I put Whataburger on my daily, but yes,
yeah, I don't
I
know
know
if I
what you
could do that
mean.
either.
And you know, I think you talked about the business model. It's point to point. It's yeah.
Yes.
How do people pay for it?
Yeah, so it's point to point. You book anytime on our website and you can depart and leave at any time. This is important because let's say you're a consultant and you're going up to a happy hour. Well, driving back is not allowed,
Hmm.
especially if you're an energy company. The amount of safety requirements that you have, even with one or two drinks, is not allowed. And so that's why we have flexibility with Electrip. It allows you to not have to spend the night in a hotel. You can go
Mm.
back home to your family, wake up the next morning, send your kids to school. That's a big deal. I mean, we've gotten emails from spouses saying, "Thanks for having so and so back at this time. We really appreciate it." And it's the little things like that where people, I think, start to understand how when you travel, you're spending so much time, and it's
Mm.
so important to travel in Texas because there's so much business between the major cities. So,
Yeah,
yeah, the point to point aspect is really big. The ability to depart at any time is really big for us.
yeah. I met an entrepreneur yesterday. I think it was yesterday. He wanted to get involved in the ecosystem. Was coming down to the Ion
Yeah,
district, and he was coming from Bernie. He said, "Oh, I can only do this so many times, and if I come, I might even stay overnight
yeah,
because of that travel challenge."
absolutely.
and
Yeah.
and so it's real, right? And the mental toll of driving in Houston is high.
Yeah, it's extremely emotionally exhausting. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I am the driver for the family, and
Okay,
that is
yep.
like one of the chores.
Yeah,
So I
it's
get it.
rough.
So how did you know this was the business to start?
Yeah, so I actually at the same time started another business with a really good friend of mine, Taylor Zhao, really, really sharp individual, got a dual degree from UT, so he's a go-getter, right? We started a hardware business in solar tracking at the
Mm,
same time, or a little before ElecTrip,
mm,
and we kept running into roadblocks with that, with funding, with testing the actual product,
mhm,
and ultimately we decided, well, if they're both going to be capital intensive, one of them has a payout, an expected payout 5 years from now. And
mm,
we won't know how close we're getting to creating that value until later on. So the whole idea of failing fast didn't really apply. It became more of a research project.
mm,
That's not something we wanted to do as our first entrepreneurial venture.
yeah.
So as far as choosing Electrip, I had multiple ideas in the works. Ultimately, Electrip became very clear to me during an internship at BP.
Mhm,
So right off of I-10 on their trade floor in Helios, uh, one of the common problems was getting to sites to
mhm,
seal deals with clients,
mm,
and the alternative was a $1,200 black car service there and back.
mhm,
There's such a wide margin on that, and once I heard that, with my prior experience with United Airlines, I knew how much it cost to kind of maintain and operate the 737s and some of the more Embraer regional jets. So it clicked, and
mhm,
the path towards profitability was a lot more clear for me.
mhm.
As you know, as an entrepreneur,
Yeah.
you're going to run into 20,000 road bumps
Yep.
on the way, but the path was clear. It
Mm,
was more clear to me, and so it was easier for me to pursue Electrip.
yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the questions I always like to dig into is why is the time now? And I think in many ways it's self-evident, right? There is a vehicle. There is the battery technology.
Right.
But maybe are there unobvious things that you learned where you say that this is reason why this was a barrier before?
Yeah, so I would say in 2018,
Mm,
that's when we started doing the market research for Electrip
mhm,
and determining, hey, what market do we want to target? So we started by selling individual seats in the cars,
mhm,
similar to this model done by Tesloop in California.
mhm,
They're no longer in business, but we tried that, didn't work. One of the most surprising barriers that we had was actually how much Uber and Lyft paid their drivers.
hmm,
So back in 2018, 2019, an Uber driver could make a pretty good living.
hmm,
Minus inflation, they weren't paying as much for gas, repairs, et cetera, et cetera. Well, those wages have actually fallen and all the costs of operating your own car have risen.
mhm,
So, getting good drivers back in 2018, 2019 was actually a significant barrier to entry. Now we've found that it's a lot easier for us to hire drivers and pay them more.
hmm,
Than my goal was always to pay drivers at least 20% more than the average on Uber and Lyft, so that we could hire the best
mhm.
drivers on the market, and also so that people could have a living wage. And yeah, it's become a lot easier now because people have started to recognize how Uber and Lyft, minus their costs, is really below, in
Mhm.
some cases, minimum wage. So
Yeah. And in many ways, Uber and Lyft were subsidizing to get market share. I think
yes,
that
they
was the
were.
strategy, right?
Absolutely. They
And
raised what, 25 billion,
yeah,
Uber,
yeah,
the best funded startup in the last
yeah,
decade.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so in some ways, what changed is the supply market changed
Yes.
from a driver perspective, and so you it would have been too hard to compete earlier.
Correct.
And so that's an interesting nuance that you wouldn't know unless you were in it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there with all the kind of self-driving or I should say driver aid, 2.0 technology, is that better or worse for drivers, or is
Uh,
that too far in the future to think about?
so
Yeah.
it depends because I think the problem with computer vision is
Mhm.
that the very few things are actually exponential.
Yep.
Everybody loves to say, "Oh, this is exponential." Computer vision is, in my opinion, the way Tesla does it is exponential. They just have so much data. They have so many miles.
Mm,
Every new Tesla that's being sold then gets them more data, more miles driven. And if you look at their miles driven data,
mhm.
it is exponential. So the rate at which they improve self driving is up there. But I have videos of my mom, like we turn on autopilot, full self driving, and she's just freaking out because it's so unnatural.
Yeah.
It's like they learned how to drive from a Houston driver. Like it's
Mhm.
just not a calm, relaxing
Mm.
experience, and that's one of the key aspects of Electrip is that you can focus on your work.
Yeah.
So, from a driver perspective, I think the driver aid definitely helps. There's lots of route mundane tasks
Mhm.
that you can automate out,
Yeah.
such as keeping your vehicle centered in the lane and keeping a certain distance from the vehicle in front of you. What that allows our drivers to do is then look out for road hazards
Mhm.
a lot more proactively than if they were also having to do these other things. And yeah, maybe it's only 5-10% of your mental compute, but it's still enough to where maybe now you don't notice that
Mm,
piece of debris in the road and you have to jerk last minute. So self-driving is already having immediate impacts, but to the point at which it replaces the driver
yeah.
and it becomes irrelevant to the driver, that's a hard one.
Yeah.
That's
I'm
tough.
I'm curious because you're in a position to know, like, do you see it reducing OpEx or insurance costs? Or
So
like,
the
is
insurance
there
companies are
practical?
assholes. They yeah, they don't adjust for stuff like this
Yeah.
as proactively as they
b-
should.
But you could, I guess my question is, are you able to see it in your operating data, or do you just not have anything to compare
Ah,
with?
yes. Okay.
Yeah.
So when you ask that question, I
Yeah.
assume you're asking me if I just replaced all my cars with gas non Teslas
Yeah.
and how would that affect my cost? So it's very common. Not so
Mm.
Pepsi, right?
Yeah.
They they want to buy as many Tesla semis as they can manufacture because it's so clear that from an OpEx perspective, EVs are the way to go.
Mm, mm,
So the number of moving parts that you need in a gas car to move forward laterally is like 154.
mhm.
In an EV, it's 17, and four of those are the tires.
Yeah.
So in terms of what could go wrong, it's so much less.
Mhm.
In terms of we were just talking about your laptop, right? To service it, you'd have to put it in for a week. That's huge for fleets,
Yeah.
right? If you have to service a car and it's grounded for a week. So yeah, absolutely there's a clear advantage that EVs are the future from a fleet perspective. And it's hilarious to me because people always advocate the environmental benefits of EVs
Mhm.
and they should just hammer the OpEx benefits because I think that's what drives adoption.
Yeah. And that's what, that's kind of your unfair advantage in the market, right? So
Absolutely, yeah.
yeah, that's good. Is there anything else you want to share about ElecTrip that that makes you excited for its future? Yeah.
Yeah. So ElecTrip was not funded. It wasn't VC backed for the longest time,
Mhm.
especially in all of 2019.
Mhm.
And even now, our funders are private
Mm.
investors. So we had to come up with very innovative solutions for all of our problems.
Mhm.
If you don't have enough cars, normally a lean startup would not own any assets.
Yeah.
Electric owns their own assets, right? So we had to find ways to increase our capacity to match demand a little better. Same thing with parking, charging, maintaining these vehicles. So as we continue to grow and as our ride volume goes up, our team is extremely innovative and
Mm.
we've been coming up with solutions that each one in themselves could be its own startup. And as electric vehicle fleets become a lot more
Mhm.
ubiquitous, I think Electrip's going to have the solution ready to go for somebody that, for example, a Waymo
Mhm.
that says, I want to move 500 self driving electric vehicles to Houston. Who's going to help me do that? And Electric will be there to do
Mm.
that
Mm.
and to facilitate that. So, one of the ironic parts about Electric is that it doesn't have very many barriers to entry. I mean,
Mhm.
it's just obvious if you look at our business model. So, ultimately, what it comes down to is how fast do we move? How innovative are we? How
Mhm.
much can we create cool solutions to bring our costs down and to maintain a certain quality of the ride experience? And that's what we're good at.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. And I would add one more. Informing the market of the value
oh yeah,
is
this
always
is
like the
great. Yeah.
hardest part, right?
No, absolutely. I think once you get into
Yeah.
one, it makes sense. But until then, you're like, I'll just drive myself. I'd rather have my car with me. And then it's the first trip that you do in an electric versus driving
Mm.
yourself or taking a Von lane. And you realize, okay, yeah, this is a lot
This is
better.
really
Yeah.
valuable. Yeah. Did I think you were telling me a little bit before the show about some of the challenges going through COVID. Tell us a little bit about how that was, because everyone's business had to respond differently.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so we shut it down.
Yeah.
So we shut down Electrip. For a while, we did essential rides, but ultimately, what I realized was we
Mm.
weren't growing at a rate
Mm.
that justified running the business. From a personal perspective, we
Mhm.
weren't growing fast enough and we weren't learning fast enough.
Mhm.
So there wasn't enough shifts. It's ironic, right? Because everybody says during COVID, everybody had to pivot. We learned so much. Some people have these awesome stories about how they get out of COVID and they realize that they created these new revenue streams and absolutely Electric could have done all of those things, so I'm not trying to make
Mm.
an excuse for that. But it got to the point where we would put in 10 units of effort and get out 1 unit of result, whereas before it was 10 units of effort, 5 units of results, right?
Sure.
So
Sure.
it just there were such diminishing returns that we wanted to learn elsewhere. So we did new businesses, we
Mm.
meaning my team, new career paths, things like that. And so
Yeah.
it's a bit of a cop out to your question, but
Yeah.
it is what we did. It's the honest truth.
Yeah. And I mean, that's a hard decision, right? Because you have to mothball everything. Did you have concerns about uh, doing that effectively, or what it would take to restart? And like, talk us through that, how that thought process went, because I
Yeah.
know it's hard. When I went through my chapter 7, I was thinking to myself, there is no way to for my business to restart it because of the the level of effort it took for us to develop technology. Yours is different because the barriers are different. But walk us through what you're thinking or
Ye-
feeling, I should
yeah,
say.
yeah, it's interesting because yes, the startup for technology development is that's intense.
Yeah,
Yeah. For a product like ElecTrip, it's a little easier to restart. All the
yeah,
infrastructure is still there, and we don't have to innovate at a certain rate
yeah.
to where stopping is as detrimental. So, um, but it was difficult because there's a certain reputation that
Mm,
ElecTrip tries to build in terms
yeah.
of consistency and availability. That was what I was the most scared of.
Mm,
But I knew that running a fleet at half capacity or just like a low level of capacity would actually be worse. And actually, when we did a soft launch in
mm,
November of last year, we kept running into that
mm.
where every time somebody would request a ride between Austin and Dallas, operationally, it's just extremely difficult for us because
Mm,
we closed our Austin office.
yeah.
And it got to the point where I realized that if I don't just completely shut down or at least reduce the number of rides that we offer, people would eventually start to, the brand image would eventually start to
Yeah.
degrade. So,
And that's the right decision, right? Like you
yeah,
had the data, you saw the performance, and it's like you said, the amounts of effort versus the outcome.
right.
I think that's always a hard thing for a founder is, you especially when you want something to work, you have to rationalize and say, what is the information telling me? What is the market telling me? What
Yeah,
is operations telling me? And it's a lot of times with startups, timing is half of everything, right?
absolutely. Yeah.
And I wanted to say like one of the things I was impressed with was you had that frame of mind to say, look, this is what information is telling us, and we know we can make that rational decision to come back.
Yeah.
And I assume you had like assets that you were able to put on hold, which also helped.
It did help, but from a personal perspective, right? Because that's
Yeah.
part of what you asked me. I mean, it was the most challenging time as a young,
Mm.
business person because so much of my identity was circled around the
Oh yeah.
success of Electrip, right? So it's very easy to be the CEO of something that's growing, 40% a month. It's very difficult to be the founder or CEO of something that from like our revenue from March 2020 to April 2020 shrunk by 98%
Yeah. Oh
and it
my
stayed there,
gosh.
right? So I think,
That's
yeah,
yeah.
like I think in April we made $500, which
Yeah.
it's like crazy.
Yeah.
So so it is pretty crazy. And from a personal perspective, I'm actually very glad it happened, but this is very much in hindsight. I think it's ironic that we tell people to be the CEO of their companies when they're very young because of the amount of liquid cash
Mm.
available in the market. I think that is the right advice. As capital is drying up, though, it may not be because
Yeah.
you make so many low level mistakes, but you're burning a disproportionate amount of cash and so it actually helped me quite a bit from a personal level because I was able to like slow everything down, right? Go to therapy, which
Yep.
is
Yep. You
like
gotta do
not
it.
a like
Yeah.
no one at Techstars told me to go to
Yep.
therapy, but it's something that you should do. I think as a younger
Mm.
founder because there's so many aspects of being a founder that you're almost not ready for and you
Mm.
don't and unless you've been in environments where you have clear role models that you can emulate
Mm.
a lot of times you don't know how you should emotionally respond to certain things
Mm. Mm.
and so yeah so this long-winded answer all of this to say the slowdown helped me on a personal level become a lot better leader and now I'm a lot more confident in saying that if electric gets to that same growth rate I can handle it and keep it going so
Yeah. I think there's a couple of things in there to unpack. Like I definitely feel with first time founders and young innovators, you do get so conflated with your company because you
yes
gotta you gotta prove yourself,
yep
right? Like, and we all feel that. I felt that, and it's hard to say, did I, is this a market issue or is this because I didn't work hard enough? And I think we all have that reflection we have to have,
yeah
and it's so valuable to have um a group of advisors around you, if it's if it's therapists, if it's a coach who can give you that wisdom that they've developed.
right
And that's almost the first thing I tell first time founders is build an advisory board around yourself, because those are the people who support you, so that you can make those right decisions, you can grow the right way. And it's one of those things they don't teach you in startup school.
Right. No, that's very well put. No, they
Right?
don't.
They don't. They teach you, how to fail fast. They teach you how to look at unit economics, but your team is the staff who work with you, but your team is also that brain trust around you, and then that peer network that kind of supports you. And it's so important to invest in yourself that way. And it takes a while to learn, unfortunately, by accident sometimes.
Right.
Um,
Right. No,
so it
absolutely.
I definitely like relate to that. I remember when we were winding down my business and making that decision to go to chapter 7. um, I had I kept thinking of all the things I had to do to support my staff and do what was right by them, and needed to look at the situation objectively and say, this is the right choice for everyone, because
Yeah.
the reality is here, and it's not about what I need. It's not about me grinding more.
I agree. I think
Yeah,
one cool nuance to add to that,
yeah,
and I'll be curious to
yeah,
know what your perspective is on this or your experience. So I met your wife, and
yeah, Yanni. Yep.
yeah, because one of
Yeah,
the things that I've learned in the last few
yeah.
months is that if you don't create that board of trustees and
Mm,
advisors, I'm not talking about from a formal perspective like your board, but if you don't create that support structure, you I ended up relying too much on my personal connections,
mm,
and that burnt them out, and it affected our relationships. And so I'm sure, and I know there's some aspect of it to where your friends are there to support you, they're going to be there for you, but they don't also fully understand what you're going through,
mhm.
which I found further amplifies the burnout
Yeah,
for those relationships. Whereas if I talk to you
mm,
about something, you know,
yeah,
it's very different of a experience for you to hear it, because you're not freaking out and saying like, "Oh my god, everything's on fire. This is terrible." You're more empathetic in that you've been there.
yeah.
So I don't know if do you have a similar, I don't know if you've had
Yeah,
an
well,
experience like that.
well, I think that's why it's so important for founders to work with each other and get to know each other and build that peer network. Is because we've all had that same challenge of raising money, of having to hire and fire for the first time, of having to
Yeah.
make decisions with with zero information. Um,
Yeah, zero information is great.
zero information.
I've heard someone compare entrepreneurship to chess, and I was
Yeah.
like, that's the worst analogy ever, because it's zero sum perfect information.
Mm.
Entrepreneurship it should be uh multiplicative, and you really don't know what the hell's going on.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
gonna do a callback. I feel like entrepreneurship is a bit like playing StarCraft.
Okay. That's a fog of
where
war.
where you don't know how many other players they are, and you don't know how much of a head start they've had.
Yes.
And I'm just remembering, it took me a while to realize you have to make your little zerglings and go out into the fog of war
And
and
just see what's up. Yeah.
just see what's going on, so you can decide where you're gonna pool resources.
Oh,
But
that's so good.
that's a big callback.
No, that's so good.
And to be clear, I was terrible at StarCraft, so And I'm glad that you're saying now is the time to do it again.
Yeah.
And one of the things I'm amazed about, I'm time checking myself. I'm amazed with that you are able to run this with a team of 4.
Right.
And is it because the Teslas are low maintenance, or because are you working with partners who help you out? And obviously drivers are not part of that team of 4.
Right. No, no, they're
Yeah.
independent contractors. So the reason why we're able to do it is because we've optimized things so
Mm,
so well to this point where it just we can
mm,
automate so much. So
yeah.
it's a bit of a boring answer, and it's usually the obvious one, but it is what it is.
Yeah. It's doing what you need to do versus what you can outsource and partner.
Correct.
So
So
and remind me, you were at UT, which is in Austin.
yes, not University of Ohio or whatever. Yeah,
Yeah.
the other
Uh,
one.
and you did this while you started up while you were in school. You did Techstars there, but then you came to Houston. And I'm trying to remember if you're from Houston.
So I am from Houston. I
Yeah.
came to Houston for financial reasons,
Yeah.
right? During COVID, I can't live in Austin.
Mm,
So I was in Houston, and then as we're relaunching out of Houston. Most of our clients actually that stuck after COVID are in
mhm.
Houston. Energy sector is doing pretty well right now. So it is well, relative. But yeah, it's that's why I'm here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And are there things that are different in the ecosystems that you've noticed now
Yeah.
that you had time there and here? Tell us a little bit about what's different.
Yeah, I think it's a lot easier to find talent in Austin. I
Okay.
think it's a lot easier to find your co-founder in Austin.
Hmm.
But I think when people think of entrepreneurship, they always assume it with a VC backed
Mm,
startup. Houston is not like that.
hmm.
Houston is filled with insane entrepreneurs, insane tech entrepreneurs that nobody knows about because they built their business, sold it, never raised funding, and that's just who they are.
Yeah.
And you'll meet them every now and then, at River Oaks or something, and you'll ask them, what did you do? And it's, oh, I created the first voice over IP phone switch.
Mm,
And it blows my mind because that's somebody that I really idolize, but I couldn't find that guy in
mhm.
Austin
Hmm.
as often, right? Because they're if they've created something in Austin, it's a lot harder to get access to them, ironically, because
Mhm.
everybody knows what they've done and everybody wants access to them.
Mhm.
So that's one small caveat that I've seen in the
Interesting.
ecosystem.
And you one of the things you said was it's easier to find a co-founder in Austin. Is that a function of where you were in life, or is that because people in Houston have a different
Yeah,
mentality?
I think it's probably the first
Mm.
in that I had access to UT.
Okay.
And that is a phenomenal, phenomenal ecosystem, especially now. It's been built up for quite a while. And so, yeah, that's
Yeah.
probably
Yeah.
why. I don't think people in Houston have a different mentality. I would say that maybe there are more people in Houston that want to build a brick and mortar
Mhm.
business, which is
Mm.
again often looked down upon by VC just backed people in that ecosystem. But I mean, that's cool too.
Yeah. So I think one of the things I heard that you say is when you were starting ElecTrip, you also were looking at different business models and
Yes.
testing, and in many ways, you're finding co-founders to help do that testing with.
Mhm.
I think Houston's different in that you have entrepreneurs who want to do one thing and
That's
they want
very
to
well
own
put.
it and take it to the end, would and
Yes.
not necessarily involve capital partners. And so there's a little bit of a difference in philosophy that maybe makes the entrepreneurs here less open to partnering on problem solving,
Yes.
because they already have a market thesis that they're just working on.
That's a great point. And I think because they want to drive that one idea to completion, it's a lot harder to give up control.
Yeah, and
Because
partner.
right.
Yeah, and so that is a unique difference. Um, so what's something that you're proud of that you've seen here in the Houston ecosystem?
Yeah. So it's kind of cool how much importance the actual mayor of
Oh yeah,
Houston, the
yeah.
outgoing mayor of Houston, has put into startups
Hmm.
in general, and that plus the closeness with industry partners
Mm.
is very unique.
Hmm.
In Austin, there are not as many established legacy industry partners
Mm.
that you can work with. Obviously, Dell,
Mm.
Intel, Apple, they're all there. Everybody's there, but it's a little different with Houston. You can work with a company, solve a very specific problem,
Mm.
and you kind of already have your customer.
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
almost already have a customer that exists.
Yeah.
All you have to do is build a solution for them. And then sometimes you have to convince them that that's the solution they've always wanted, but there's a demand for things
Yeah.
there. Whereas in Austin, yeah, it's definitely more A/B testing. You have to
Hmm.
find what the problem is. It's not as obvious.
Yeah. So A/B testing is that true for consumer? I know that's true for consumer. Does that include like the enterprise
I
customers
would say
even?
so, yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
But again, my experience is limited in
Mm.
that I've created one B2B product. This is a very limited
Yeah.
scope and perspective. If you talk to somebody who's made 3 or 4 companies, maybe they would have a different opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. Are there any hidden gems in Houston around the
There
ecosystem? Yeah.
there are so many.
Yeah.
It's kind of hilarious to me that people, because Houston is so big, you
Mm.
have to drive everywhere. You have to get around. I think the Houston ecosystem, the one irony is that they may not want you to partner with them on their idea. Might be a little bit
Mm.
harder for you to convince them
Mm.
to become partnerships, but there are so many people that are looking to build friendships
Yeah.
that it's relatively easy. And Houston has everything. You
Mhm.
world-class opera,
Mhm.
awesome gun range, incredible Vietnamese food, right? It's you can keep going
All
on
right.
and on.
Throw down the gauntlet. Where is the best banh mi in Houston?
Oh man, you can't do that. It's
All right, I'll tell
there's
you, they're not around anymore. Les Gravales in Midtown. Oh
yeah,
my gosh, that was the other leg of my Houston stool of places to go.
man, that's awesome. Do you know why they closed down?
I'm not gonna say on the air.
Fair enough.
Well, it was one of these places where you can get this whole sandwich, and it was tasty. It had the pate, and it was also only $2.75. Right, and you go looking at this, the line would go out the door for 20 minutes, and you go, "How do they make any money?" The answer was they didn't make money. That's probably why they went out of business, but they had been there for 12, 15
Okay, I
years.
think I know where this story is going.
Yeah, yeah.
I can kind of guess based
So
on what Houston businesses do, but yes.
yeah.
Okay, all right.
Who knows? So, no, do you have a favorite place or
Yeah, so man, favorite restaurant, yeah?
yeah,
So I'm a huge pizza rat. Like
okay.
I love pizza. Gypsy Poet
Oh,
is
Gypsy
world
Poet.
class. Do you
Yeah,
agree?
I've been there. It's awesome.
It's
It's
so good.
and the couple that run it are just hilarious.
Yes,
So
they
yeah,
are. But
it's
it's funny because sometimes you'll go and it's closed and it's like they're backpacking somewhere.
yeah.
It's like, all right,
Uh,
whatever. We'll wait for
do,
you to come back.
do your best life.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you think about Houston, are there places where there are significant gaps? Where maybe it's a challenge for early stage entrepreneurs.
Ah, I mean, you can just the
Mm.
cop out is fundraising.
Yeah.
It's just not as available.
Mhm.
But I think if you have in Houston, you can't lose money for 3 years. If
Yeah.
you go to investors and say, "We plan on losing money for 3 years. We're going to create the world's best water bottle startup," it's just going to laugh at you because they know how hard consumer packaged goods are. They know how hard it is to get shelf space, et cetera, et cetera. So that's going to be
Yeah.
difficult.
So, I mean, they like cash flowing businesses.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that the beauty of that is if you have a clear business model and you think it's going to grow, there's so much capital here.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of capacity to fund those businesses.
Yeah.
So,
There's a part of me that wonders if that comes out of oil and gas, and I keep thinking some oil fields do take longer than 3 years to
yes, they
fund,
do.
but I think folks also understand very readily if drill a well and spud it, oil's gonna come out if you're right or wrong,
That's right.
and you can build a financial model out of that pretty quickly.
Absolutely.
And it kinda points to, I think, some of the investors in Houston don't like technology risk, and they like understanding business model risk, and again, getting back to cash flow. But if there's a big question on if it takes more than 3 years to get this water bottle out,
which
let's
which
wait and
is
see.
which
Yeah.
is so opposite, right?
Yeah.
Because without some type of technology barrier in Austin and San Francisco, it's very difficult to get funded.
Yeah.
So there's some aspect of uniqueness to Houston that gives it an advantage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's something the investor community here wants to learn because we all realize in the energy transition there will be advantage technologies that need to be funded, right? And
Absolutely.
so I think folks recognize it. Um, wi- Being here in Houston, we all have personal experiences with climate. Do you have a personal climate impact story where it's changed your life?
Yeah, so there are beautiful places all around the world. I've been very fortunate in college to be able to go to these places
Mm-hmm.
because of case competitions and
Mm-hmm.
the awesome energy companies here that'll sponsor trips and stuff. I remember going to, I won't say the exact city because I don't want to ruin the experience, but I remember going to this beautiful city and within 20 minutes, my nose just was bleeding
Mm-hmm.
because the pollution was so bad in my body. I'd never experienced concentrated pollution of that level. So this isn't a atmospheric CO2 experience that I can share with you, but in terms of tailpipe emissions, localized emissions, it was so bad. People always talk about how electric vehicles are really bad for the environment. And there are some truth to that, but localized emissions are awful.
Yeah.
And if you can move them outside of the city, that is great.
Yeah.
And I'm a huge proponent of that because there's these beautiful places all over the world that are getting ruined
Mm-hmm.
and it's not fun to go. People that are of lower income, they can't do anything about the air they breathe. They can't buy a $300 air purifier. They make $6,000 a year, right?
Yep. Yep.
So they can't spend 5% of their income on that. So yeah, it's just one of those things that I think about, and it impacted me. And I get to fly away
Mm.
after my vacation, so people can't.
Yeah.
So
No, I had a similar experience. My grandmother's family is in Taipei, and I remember going there,
yes,
and it's just I would have like a layer of soot on my face when I'd come in,
it's
and it's
wild.
just it's doesn't happen in the U.S. Doesn't happen in Houston, and the other kind of compounding factors. We didn't have central air. Like everything was like these little split valves, and as a
Yes,
result, the family always kept the windows and doors open, right? And so it's just all that would always come in, and it is a very different experience. And it was all that localized point source pollution,
pollution.
right?
Yeah.
And those are the big things that change when we transition our energy and infrastructure.
Yeah,
So
and I'm looking. I mean,
yeah,
that's really optimistic, right? The,
yeah,
the world has a lot of natural beauty.
yeah,
So
yeah. No, I
yeah,
appreciate that. When we think about everyone's always talking about IRA and things like that. There's clearly a lot of capital coming into this industry to support electric vehicles.
yeah.
How does that affect your pitch, frankly, to investors?
So the way that ElecTrip funded was very different.
Mm,
We took a very, very unique approach to funding, and it helped us increase our valuation pretty significantly. And it centered around how we finance our vehicles,
mm,
and the IRA is going to help
mm,
definitely increase the adoption of electric vehicles because of all of the subsidies that are flooding in, not only for the vehicle itself, but the chargers and the
mm,
infrastructure. I I actually side with Elon Musk's approach on this, or
mm,
his argument in that nobody needs subsidies in this
mm.
environment. But see, this is tricky for me
Yeah.
because I don't think that it's helping me at a personal level. So I don't
Yep.
want to talk shit about it, but it's also like as a philosophy or as a
Uh,
moral stance, I know that there are so many industries that get subsidies, but I don't think that any of those are justified.
mm,
So it is difficult for me.
yeah.
But so the reason why I'm saying this is because the technology itself, the core technology, it's getting funding as well, but that's not what the focus is. It's for companies that now need the subsidies in order to survive. So they
Mm,
waited so long to invest in electric vehicles and in infrastructure that they're behind the Chinese companies that have
mm,
been doing it for decades and definitely behind Tesla.
yeah.
So it's a little interesting to me.
Yeah.
One of the things they did in the IRA was any hybrid with more than, I think, 9 kilowatt hours of battery
Mm.
life has full access to the subsidy, which could then actually slow the transition to fully
To
electric
fully
vehicles.
electric, yeah,
Yeah.
because now your hybrid Hummer can
Qualifies,
subsidize, yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah. No, I understand. It's one of those things because you know, uh, getting a subsidy doesn't necessarily take it away from someone else,
Right.
and all the other industries do have extant historic subsidies, and so it's now that it's here, use it, right,
Yeah.
and that's kind of where we're at.
And
Yeah,
that's why I can't give you a clear answer on it
yeah,
because from a moral perspective, I do disagree with it, but it does
yeah.
help. And so it's tricky.
Yeah. So, as we start to uh, think about decarbonizing or transitioning our transportation ecosystem, that's not a word, our transportation infrastructure, um, are there things that should be done to accelerate adoption?
Hmm. Yeah, I think so. The battery pack sizes can be reduced
Mm,
significantly, which will increase the amount of manufacturable electric vehicles that exist.
mhm,
Ultimately, the thing that's needed is more charging infrastructure at apartment complexes.
mhm,
So we need to incentivize. So I'll give you an example. There's a Tesla supercharger at an HEB close to Midtown, right?
mhm,
That thing is always full.
mhm.
It's always full because it's so convenient to be able to grocery shop and charge your car.
Yeah.
That needs to exist at a more localized level. So Anoop Parikh, he has his own company it's called Pangea Charging, and that's his biggest sales pitch to these infrastructure projects or apartment complexes is that this is actually now going to change consumer behavior and they will pay more rent.
Yeah.
So there needs to be some level of education around property owners understanding that yes, there is actually a huge advantage to electric vehicle infrastructure
Mhm.
being built for localized use.
Yeah, especially for younger renters who will demand that.
They
Yeah.
absolutely
Yeah.
will. Yes.
Yeah. Good. So as we start to wrap up here, I want to ask, as we think about climate and climate change, is there any sort of wildlife that you would like to preserve, or you think it's just really important that kind of represents what we're working towards?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, this is a pretty hardy plant, but
Yeah.
rosemary for
Yeah.
sure. I love it. Italian is my favorite food, and they'd be sad if it died.
Hmm.
So yeah, rosemary for sure. Like
Yeah.
that's my go-to.
Yeah. It's just it's one of those things that you got to appreciate that just is out there in the wild and in the world that
Yeah,
we need to um, be conscious of.
no, absolutely. At UT, they have rosemary
Oh,
bushes,
okay.
so I would take it and cook with it at
Yeah.
my place, and it was great. It was an awesome flavor elevator.
Yeah. I have rosemary in my front yard, and I like to give it a little like head rub,
So that you can kind
so I
of.
can get it like it
That's
goes in
so
the air,
cool.
it gets in my hands. I love it.
Yeah,
I don't think my rosemary survived the freeze that we
that's
had it.
very sad.
Yeah, and
That's really
it's
sad.
just the extremes on climate, even in the local weather, can do that.
Right, and it's getting
It's
more pronounced, right? Like it's
Yeah.
measurable.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like the highs and lows, and that's kind of what challenges some of the flora we have here,
right.
because it hasn't been that extreme for the last 100 years.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, so that's a
It
challenge.
doesn't have to it doesn't have to slide a couple degrees. It's just the
It's
delta.
the delta of the hottest hot and the coldest cold, and there's a lot of because I guess the climate and weather patterns are transitioning. It translates to more risk is the wrong way to describe it, but variability, volatility,
Right, right.
in the weather patterns.
Interesting.
It's I was Laura, who's not here today. She was telling me, um, we had a tornado watch this week.
Yes, we
What
did.
what,
We had to
what
cancel rides
but,
because of it. Yeah.
like do tornadoes happen in January?
I don't think so. I've never
Exactly.
as growing up, I've never seen it.
Right.
Yeah.
That's part of the climate weather thing
Right.
changing, and it usually you don't see tornadoes till March or April, but here we are in
It's
January. and it's going to happen more.
So is food scarcity something that people are starting to pay attention to now? Because of variability in weather, volatility in weather is
Yeah.
going up.
Yeah. I think you see it in prices. So Federico, who runs Moonflower Farms, he has a hydroponic farm out in on outside of Houston.
Oh, I've seen him on
Yeah,
YouTube, I think.
yeah, he's
Yeah.
he's fantastic.
Yeah.
He was telling me he lost all his basil during
That's
the freeze,
awful.
and
What?
so basil was up 5 times in value because that's what people wanted to pay for it. His iceberg lettuce growing well, but there are these individual crops that get affected by local weather,
Mm,
and you do see it show up kind of in the spot market because everyone wants their fresh basil, not their dried basil.
yeah.
And I bought his last basil plant, so
You're a
that's
rich
how
man.
I know. Part of it's supporting him.
You're
So
speculating on basil
yeah,
futures?
I ate the basil future, so
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, fair.
So as you look forward and you look forward to the next year, like I'm excited for where ElecTrip is going. What is one thing our audience could do to support you?
Yeah. I think right now on our website, you can go and this is a cop out, but you can
Yeah,
go and book a ride.
go for it.
I think you would love the experience once you see
Hmm.
how just relaxing it is, how much more work you can
Hmm.
get done. We've had people tell us that ElecTrip helps them be more productive than they are in the
Hmm.
office because no one's gossiping and blah 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 and bothering you and pulling you into meetings. Right? You just can't go to the meeting; you just have to work. So try out the service, try out the experience, and if you know someone traveling, if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, I'm more than happy to get that referral and set them up with a ride. So if
Yeah,
you watch the podcast and you tell me that you watched the podcast and you connect with me, yeah, we'll hook you up with a free ride.
nice, nice. All right, free ride. I'm gonna put that on the LinkedIn post.
Absolutely.
Tell us what the website is.
www.electrip.us.
All
And
right.
it's not because I'm super patriotic, it's because the .com domain is super expensive.
All right, cool. Do you have any departing thoughts before we wrap?
Yeah, I think that this is cool.
Hmm.
Thank you for doing stuff like this because it shows entrepreneurs that they're not so alone.
Hmm.
It shows younger people that there are older people that are trying their best to work on the environment. And yeah, I think it'd be great to keep building this Houston community. I love Houston. I love the people. I love the opportunity that Houston and this country provides to us. So it's awesome. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thanks for being here, Mandeep. This is fantastic.